Do you cut your hair with a mirror like a caveman? Hmm?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Roberto Marquez. In this video, I demonstrate how to cut your own hair with the aid of Raspberry Pi, TV, camera, Chromecast, and optionally Ansible and Jenkins. The main goal of this project is to be able to see the back of your own head while cutting your hair.
Hardware for this product is pretty simple. It's a Raspberry Pi plugged into the wall and mounted onto this arm, I guess. It's just a piece of wire coated with plastic that I found on the street. And this is just some tape to hold the cable in place. And at the end is the camera that is connected to the Raspberry Pi. There's also a Wi-Fi dongle attached to it so that we can stream the photos from the camera.
The software prerequisites for this project include enabling the Raspberry Pi camera via Raspi config. Make sure that's enabled. You also have to have set up Wi-Fi connections, as well as enabling SSH logins. And optionally, you'll need a Jenkins instance, and that should also have Ansible pre-installed. My evaluation of this project is that it worked okay for a first attempt. but I need to nail down the frame rate issue. Next time maybe I'll use just a Raspberry Pi camera and not a USB one, since I think maybe that's why I was getting slow frame rates, but I'm not sure. My main evaluation for this project is that it probably would have worked better if I actually knew how to cut hair. The main software powering this project is Motion. It runs just fine on the Raspberry Pi and can connect to USB cameras or the Raspberry Pi camera. And the first thing I'm going to do is show how to install and configure Motion just using the Raspberry Pi. And then afterwards I'll show how to configure Motion on the Raspberry Pi using Jenkins and Ansible. So the first thing we need to do is log into the Raspberry Pi, and it's at this IP here. And I've already set up the key store, so I don't have to put the password. That's why I logged in automatically. So the next thing we'll do after logging in is actually issue the command that installs Motion via the apt program, and you'll see something similar to the following, where it's checking the dependency trees and seeing what it has to load. But in my case, I've already installed it, so it gives this message here about the newest version is already installed on the system. You'll have to hit yes if it's the first time you've installed Motion, and that'll give you the software package, but then you actually need to start it, and the command for that is here, sudo motion. For whatever reason you don't need like a start command or anything, it's just, you just call Motion. And I'll hit enter, but I would hit enter, but I already have it running on the Raspberry Pi and I'll get an error message. So just on your system, if you haven't set it up at all, this is the command you'll use to start it. Once you've started Motion on the Raspberry Pi and you don't see any error messages, you should be able to go to the browser, go to a browser and hit the IP, and it uses by default a port of 8080. So in my case, I'm on the Raspberry Pi here, and if you don't know your Raspberry Pi's IP address, you can hit ifconfig and it'll tell it to you. So this is the one it's using, and you specify colon and then the port number, which is 8081, and you'll get a live stream of the recording. You can see I'm just going to place my hand in front so you can see that it's live. Okay, so now that you have your Raspberry Pi using Motion, you want to be able to cast it to the TV so that you have the back of your head displayed in front of you. So to do that, you'll have to have already configured your Chromecast and set it up on your network, and then on this page where it's streaming the USB camera, you'll right click, and just like any other thing that you can cast, you'll select that option, and then in my case it's called Attic TV. And then the next thing you should see on the camera is a picture of the camera, because it's doing the infinity, kind of like the infinity window. But that's pretty much how you would set it up with a basic Raspberry Pi, Chromecast, and a web browser to view the camera. So the next thing I want to show is the frame rate configuration. By default, it may be too fast or too slow, depending on what kind of Raspberry Pi you're using. So for that, I used VI to edit this file here that is under the location etc motion config. And then you can scroll down to this next thing that I'm going to show isn't why I came in here, but if for some reason you're not getting the video device, make sure that this video capture file is the actual one that your Raspberry has. And then the one that I did come into this file that you probably will have to change is the value of frame rate. And I currently have it set to 28. You may want to lower that depending, I don't know, if you want it slower, or raise it if you want it to be capturing more images. But that's the basic setup for a standalone Raspberry Pi. Next, I want to show how you would achieve this in an automated fashion using Jenkins and Ansible. So for that, I want to go to the source code repository that has that configuration, and it's at github.com under my account, which is oneberto, and then the project name is electronics. And then under electronics, there's several sub-projects, and the one that we're going to look at is the Neji engrave, which is a completely different project for a laser engraver, but it has a portion that is used for this project to cut our hair, my hair. And so in this Neji engrave folder, if you drill down to this location, source main continuous camera Jenkins file, you'll see the configuration that will be added to Jenkins pipeline job. And so we are just specifying these steps here, which some of them are debug, like the echo statement and saying and listing what our current directory is, as well as this list directory command. And here's the actual commands that do something. So we're going to change directory to this Ansible directory and copy this Ansible inventory path to the current directory, which after this is Ansible. And then as a sanity check, we have this ls to display that we have copied the Ansible inventory file. And then lastly, we'll call Ansible playbook, which is already installed on the Jenkins server, specifying the camera YML as well as an inventory file that we copied over in the previous in this copy command. And then we're specifying in that inventory file we want to use the alias. We want to apply those playbook to the alias known as camera light stick, and that's defined in that file with its IP and other configuration to be able to log in. So let's look at what this camera YML is doing. So here it is under the Ansible directory, and all it does is call the camera role. And if we go up a directory, we can see that it lives here under roles, camera, and then tasks holds the YML for the main. And this is really what helps automate and provision a Raspberry Pi in case you have to do it for a bunch of them, right? You don't want to sit there and type those commands. You just want to set up an inventory file and say, hey, apply it to these aliases. And the first thing is, you may have guessed, is to install Motion via apt and to copy a Motion config file to the location that Motion expects it, and as well as a configuration for startup. And then it calls Motion to start it, and lastly it creates a cron job entry, a cron table entry to start Motion whenever the system is reboot. So let's look at how we would actually do that in Jenkins now that we have configuration to run it in an automated fashion. So here on this browser window, I have a local Jenkins instance that has already pulled in the source code, but I'll go over that here briefly, and then we can go through a successful run of the camera being set up. So to do this, to set up a new job, you would go to your wherever dashboard you want and select new item and give it whatever name and specify that it's a pipeline and hit OK. Once you do that, you'll come to a screen similar to this configuration page for the camera, and it'll ask you to put in what is the it'll ask you to put in the location of the repository. So the first thing you'll specify is that it is using a pipeline script from from Source Control Management, and it's from Git. It's using Git. And then the URL repository is going to be what we looked at earlier here, which is the URL for this. So you'll hit clone, copy, and then paste that in here. And there's one last step that we need to specify so that it uses this Jenkins file, which is the one we looked at right here. So if you need to know the path to that, it's all of this right here. So you would copy that and paste it right there and hit save, and then you would have a job that's ready to run. So let's look at what a successful run of this job looks like. So the pipeline has its output here, and you can see that it's checking out that repository, and for this case it found this latest change, and here you can see where it's running the camera tasks of the present working directory, list the directory, copy, change directory to the Ansible directory, copy the inventory file to the present working directory, verify that it's there, and then lastly it issues the Ansible playbook command on the camera file, YML file, using this inventory and applying it to this alias. And you can see that it goes through the tasks beginning with camera, to install motion, and to copy the configuration file, to copy the startup configuration file, to start motion, and then to create the cron job so that whenever it restarts, its motion is started as well. And you can see that here we get a successful. And that's how you would configure Jenkins to run Ansible scripts to provision a Raspberry Pi for motion USB capture from a camera. The one little piece that I left out was, where does this come from? Like, how does Jenkins know that, how does Jenkins know what this path is? And I can't show you this file because it has some production information in there, but I'll show you where you would set that up in Jenkins to get to have that available for your pipeline. And so under Jenkins configuration, you'll come up to this page here, and it specifies, you know, how to mask passwords and your Maven properties if you need to set that up. But further down underneath global properties, you want to set up an environment variable that is the Ansible inventory path as seen here, and give it a location somewhere on the Jenkins file. So this is the one that has the aliases and IPs for the inventory file. And that's a detailed setup of how to automate this project. It was a bit risky cutting my own hair, and I probably should not have used the zero guard, but this was a fun way to use technology in a way that I had not before. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more DIY grooming content.